Late one foggy evening at Althorp Estate, security cameras captured something that would send chills down the spines of millions around the world. A small white dog, appearing out of nowhere near Princess Diana's island, grave, began to howl, not the typical bark of a lost pet, but a mournful, almost human-like cry that echoed across the tranquil lake where the people's princess rests. The footage shows the animal circling the memorial, pawing at the ground, and then doing something that defies explanation. It sat perfectly still, staring at the island for nearly 17 minutes before vanishing into the mist. No one knows where the dog came from, how it got past the estate's tight security, or where it went afterward. But what happened next would spark a global conversation about love, loss, and whether some bonds transcend even death itself. Staff members who reviewed the footage noticed something even stranger. The dog appeared to be responding to something on the island, tilting its head as if listening to a voice only it could hear. When investigators tried to trace the animal's path using additional cameras around the estate, they found that it simply disappeared from every angle, as though it had never been there at all. The only proof of its existence was that 17 minutes of footage and the dozens of witnesses who swear they heard its cries echoing across the lake that night. Over the years, something strange has been happening at Althorp Estate. Visitors working near the memorial temple have reported hearing sounds that shouldn't be there. The soft whimper of a dog echoing across the lake, especially during full moons. What makes this truly weird is that no dogs are officially allowed on the property. The estate has strict rules about this, yet multiple guests completely unconnected to each other insist they've seen the same thing. A small white dog that looks like a Jack Russell, wandering near the memorial where people leave flowers for Diana. These aren't just random people making stuff up for attention. We're talking about tourists, historians, even members of the press who've come to cover anniversary events. They all describe the same animal, the same behavior, the same haunting sounds. One visitor wrote in a guest book that she saw the dog sitting by the lake's edge, as if waiting for someone who would never come. Another claimed to have photographed it, but when they checked their camera later, the image was somehow corrupted, just blank white space where the dog should have been. The estate staff refuses to talk about it publicly, which only makes the whole thing more mysterious. When reporters have tried to ask questions, they're usually met with polite deflections or complete silence. Some former employees, speaking anonymously years after leaving, have admitted that weird things happen around the island grave all the time. Unexplained sounds, animals appearing where they shouldn't be, a general feeling that something or someone is watching over that small piece of land in the middle of the water. What really kicked us into overdrive was when social media got involved. A viral TikTok compilation tagged in Diana grave started making the rounds, and it's absolutely insane. The footage, pieced together from various visitors over several years, shows what appears to be the same small dog howling near the lake. In some clips, you can see the fog rolling in while this animal just sits there, crying into the mist. The comments section exploded with people calling it Diana's spirit guide, or the soul of her childhood pet Barrymore, who she reportedly buried herself in the estate's gardens when she was young. Some people think it's just a coincidence, maybe a local dog that keeps escaping and wandering onto the grounds. But others are absolutely convinced there's something deeper going on here, something that connects to who Diana was as a person and what she represented to millions of people around the world. Here's where the story gets even more intense. Locals who lived near Althorp in the late 1990s remember something that still gives them chills to this day. The Spencer family once kept 2 loyal Labradors, and after Diana's death, these dogs did something that nobody could explain. Every single night, they would sit by the lake where Diana was buried. Not for a few minutes, we're talking hours. They would just sit there, staring at the island, completely still except for the occasional dipless whimper. The groundkeepers noticed it first. They'd be doing their evening rounds and there would be these 2 dogs, perfectly positioned where they could see the island, acting like they were on guard duty or something. This went on for weeks after the funeral. Some people saw it as pure animal loyalty, which is already pretty emotional when you think about it. But others interpreted it as something way deeper, like these animals could sense that something sacred had happened, that someone special was resting there. What's crazy is that dogs are known for being incredibly sensitive to human emotion and energy. There are countless documented cases of dogs mourning their owners, sometimes for years after they've passed. But this felt different to the people who witnessed it. These weren't even Diana's personal dogs, they were family pets, who probably didn't spend that much time with her, yet they acted like they'd lost someone they loved. The behavior eventually stopped after a few months, but the memory stuck with everyone who saw it. It became part of the local folklore around Althorp, one of those stories that gets passed down and takes on new meaning with each retelling. When you combine it with all the other reports of dogs appearing near the grave, it starts to feel like there's a pattern here that nobody can fully explain. Now, this is where things get seriously weird, and honestly, kind of creepy. There's been this persistent rumor floating around for years that Diana's body was actually buried on that island at Althorp. The official story is that she rests there, surrounded by water and trees, in peace and privacy. But in 2025, a YouTube documentary called Unusual Things dropped a theory that completely rocked the internet. According to their investigation, Diana might actually be in the Spencer family vault at St. Mary's Church in Great Brington instead. This isn't just random speculation. There were reports that the crypt doors at this church were found mysteriously opened just days after Diana's funeral in 1997. Nobody could explain how it happened or who did it. The church was supposed to be locked and secured, yet there they were, wide open. Worker from Althorp sent an email to a paranormal researcher sharing a story that sounds like it came straight out of a movie. He said that Diana's body was secretly moved under cover of darkness, and to pull it off, the army created a brief village-wide blackout so nobody could see what was happening. During this alleged operation, guards stationed around the area heard something that freaked them out: dogs barking endlessly around the church. Not just a few barks here and there, but constant, relentless noise, as if the animals sensed something sacred happening. According to this anonymous source, it wasn't just one or two dogs either. It sounded like an entire pack, howling and barking in a way that made even the soldiers uncomfortable. Now, we have to be real here. This is an unverified claim from someone who won't reveal their identity. It could be completely made up. But when you layer it on top of everything else, the mysterious dog sightings, the Labradors mourning by the lake, the opened crypt doors, it starts to create this web of strange coincidences that's hard to ignore. Whether or not Diana's body was actually moved, the fact that dogs keep appearing in these stories feels significant somehow. To really understand why all these dog stories matter, you need to know who Diana was when the cameras weren't rolling. Those who knew her best say she had this extraordinary connection with animals that went way beyond just liking cute puppies. Her former butler, Paul Burrell, shared something that most people never knew about. Diana would regularly feed injured or stray dogs behind the gates of Kensington Palace, doing it quietly, away from the eyes of royal staff who might have disapproved. This wasn't some publicity stunt or photo op thing. She did it because she genuinely cared about creatures that couldn't help themselves. Even as a child growing up at Althorp, she was known for rescuing small animals. There was a spaniel named Barrymore who became especially important to her. When that dog died, Diana didn't just have the staff handle it. She reportedly buried Barrymore herself in the estate's gardens, a personal goodbye to an animal she loved. What's even more powerful is something her former classmates from West Heath School remembered. They said Diana once told them something that, decades later, sounds almost prophetic. She said if she ever died, hoped dogs would come to her first, because they don't judge. Think about that for a second. Here's a woman who would go on to become the most photographed person on Earth, constantly scrutinized and judged by millions. And what she wanted most was the pure, unconditional acceptance that only animals can give. That quote hits different when you know the full story of her life. Diana was judged for everything: her marriage, her divorce, her boyfriends, her fashion choices, her charity work, even how she raised her kids. The media and the public had an opinion about every single thing she did. But dogs? Dogs didn't care if she was a princess, or what dress she wore, or whether she followed royal protocol. They just loved her for being kind. This deep connection to animals wasn't separate from who she was as the people's princess. It was actually central to it. The same compassion she showed to stray dogs was the same compassion she showed to AIDS patients when nobody would touch them, to landmine victims in Angola, to homeless people in London. She saw suffering and she couldn't look away. Whether it was a human being or a scared animal, it didn't matter to Diana. She just wanted to help. While everyone focused on the glamorous princess in designer gowns attending state dinners, the real Diana was writing handwritten letters late at night that revealed a completely different side of her personality. In 2004, these letters were uncovered and they gave historians a rare window into her private world. She wrote them to Anne Runn, her family's housekeeper, Violet Collison, and they're filled with the kind of warmth and humor you'd never expect from someone with her public image. In these notes, Diana talked about her sons in a way that was so genuine and human. She wrote about William's laughter, about Harry's curiosity, about wanting them to grow up understanding real life instead of being trapped in some royal bubble. These weren't carefully crafted PR statements designed to make her look good. They were honest thoughts from a mother who was trying her best to give her kids a normal childhood in the most abnormal circumstances imaginable. And that's exactly what she did. Unlike generations of royals before her, who basically handed their children over to nannies and barely saw them, Diana completely changed the game. She took William and Harry on the London Underground. She brought them to McDonald's. She took them to homeless shelters so they could see how other people lived. She attended their school events, hugged them in public without caring who was watching, and showed the world that even princes deserved a mother's warmth. This was revolutionary at the time. The royal family had spent centuries maintaining this cold, distant image, where showing emotion was considered weak or improper. Diana threw all of that out the window. She cried in public, she laughed in public, she showed affection to her children in public, and by doing that, she redefined what it meant to be royal. She proved that you could be dignified and relatable at the same time, that being vulnerable didn't make you less powerful, it actually made you more human. The letters to Violet Collison capture this perfectly. They show a woman who was simultaneously living in palaces and dealing with the same worries every parent has. Is my kid eating enough vegetables? Are they happy? Are they going to be okay? It's that combination of extraordinary circumstances and ordinary concerns that made Diana so relatable to millions of people who would never live anything close to her life. Restless Diana, known worldwide as the People's Princess, was laid to rest at Althorp Estate, her family's ancestral home in Northamptonshire. The location of her grave is intentionally isolated and protected. Her final resting place sits on a small island in the middle of a tranquil lake, surrounded by willow trees that create a natural barrier between her and the outside world. The setup is designed so that visitors can't actually get close to the grave itself. You can only approach from a distance, leaving flowers at a nearby memorial temple while the island remains guarded and separate. This wasn't an accident. The Spencer family wanted to make sure Diana could finally have the privacy in death that she never got in life. No photographers with telephoto lenses, no tourists taking selfies, just peace and quiet, protected by water on all sides. The island itself is beautiful in a melancholic way. The willows drape over the water, creating this almost mystical atmosphere, especially when fog rolls in across the lake. It's the kind of place that naturally feels sacred, like it was meant to hold something important. The fact that Diana grew up on this estate, running through these same grounds as a child, makes it even more meaningful. She came home, in a sense. But here's what's interesting. The very isolation that was meant to protect her has also created this aura of mystery. Because people can't get close, because there are all these rules and barriers, it leaves room for imagination and speculation. What's really happening on that island? Is she actually there? What do the groundskeepers see when they're alone on the property at night? The distance creates questions that can never be fully answered. The memorial temple where visitors leave flowers has become a pilgrimage site for people from all over the world. On the anniversary of her death every year, thousands of bouquets pile up, each one representing someone whose life she touched. Some people travel across continents just to stand there and pay their respects. They can't see the grave itself, but they can stand in that space and feel connected to her memory somehow. That's the power she still holds, even decades after her death. So what are we supposed to make of all this? The crying dog at the grave, the Labradors who mourned for months, the mysterious animal that keeps appearing in the fog, the barking during the alleged secret body movement. Whether any of it is literally true or not, it all points to something deeper about who Diana was and what she meant. The thing is, Diana represented unconditional empathy in a way that public figures almost never do. Her compassion extended not only to people, but to every living creature. She saw a stray dog and thought it deserved food and kindness. She saw a dying AIDS patient and thought they deserved dignity and human touch. She saw landmine victims and homeless people and sick children, and she didn't just feel bad for them, she actually did something about it. That's why these dog stories resonate so much, even if some of them might be exaggerated or misremembered. They fit perfectly with the Diana we knew. Of course there would be a dog crying at her grave. Of course animals would sense something special about that place. Of course she would have wanted dogs to come to her first. It all makes sense because it matches who she was as a person, someone who believed that the most vulnerable beings, whether human or animal, deserved love and protection. Maybe the mysterious white dog is real. Maybe it's a myth that grew out of people's need to believe that someone as good as Diana couldn't just be gone forever. Maybe it's a little of both. But what's undeniable is that 27 years after her death, people are still telling stories about her, still visiting her grave, still trying to make sense of how someone so famous could also be so genuinely kind. The viral videos and the ghost stories and the conspiracy theories about where she's really buried, they're all just different ways of processing the same basic truth. The world lost something irreplaceable when Diana died. And we're still not over it. We probably never will be. Her former classmates' memory of her quote about dogs not judging has taken on this almost prophetic quality now. She wanted to be met by creatures who would love her without conditions, without agendas, without caring about her title or her fame. And if even a fraction of these stories are true, if there really are dogs appearing at her grave, crying for her, standing guard over her memory, then maybe, in some strange way, she got exactly what she wished for. The question that keeps coming back, the one that fuels all these theories and sightings and late-night internet deep dives, is simple. Why dogs? Why this specific animal showing up again and again in stories about Diana's death and burial? Some say it's because dogs represent loyalty and unconditional love, the exact qualities Diana embodied. Others think it's pure coincidence being amplified by people's grief and need for meaning. But then you remember that anonymous security worker's email about the dogs barking endlessly during the alleged body movement. You remember the Labradors sitting vigil by the lake for months. You remember the TikTok videos of that small white dog howling in the fog. You remember Diana herself saying she hoped dogs would come to her first. And suddenly it doesn't feel like coincidence anymore. It feels like there's a pattern here, a thread connecting all these strange events that we don't fully understand. Whether the crying dog at Althorp is a real animal, a spiritual presence, or just a story we tell ourselves to cope with loss doesn't really matter in the end. What matters is what it represents. The idea that goodness and compassion leave echoes, that don't fade, that some connections run so deep they might actually transcend death itself. Princess Diana spent her entire adult life being watched, judged, analyzed, and criticized by millions of people she would never meet. She was hunted by photographers, betrayed by family, and turned into a commodity by the very institution she married into. But through it all, she never lost her fundamental kindness, her ability to see the humanity in everyone, her refusal to pretend that suffering didn't matter just because it happened to people or animals that society deemed unimportant. The stories about the dog at her grave, whether completely factual or partially mythologized, capture something essential about her legacy. They remind us that Diana wasn't just a princess or a fashion icon or a celebrity. She was someone who understood that the smallest gestures of compassion could mean everything to those who received them. She fed stray dogs not because it was glamorous, but because they were hungry. She hugged AIDS patients not because it was politically smart, but because they needed human touch. She buried her childhood pet herself because it mattered to her, even though royal protocol probably said someone else should handle it. And now, all these years later, people claim that a dog sits by her grave and cries. That dogs appeared when her body was supposedly being moved in the dead of night. That the animals she loved in life somehow still watch over her in death. Maybe it's all true. Maybe none of it is. Or maybe the real truth is somewhere in between. That these stories exist because Diana's impact was so profound that we need to believe there's still some part of death. Her here, still looking out for the vulnerable, still embodying that pure, non-judgmental compassion she valued so much. The mystery of the crying dog at Princess Diana's grave remains unsolved, and perhaps that's exactly how it should be. Some questions don't need definitive answers. Some stories are more powerful when they remain in that uncertain space between fact and legend, where the truth of the emotion matters more than the truth of the event. What we know for certain is this: a woman who loved dogs and hated judgment now rests on an island surrounded by water, guarded by willows, visited by thousands who never knew her, but felt like they did. And somewhere in the fog at Althorp Estate, people keep seeing a small white dog that won't stop crying, a mystery that refuses to die, just like the memory of the people's princess herself. The question isn't whether the dog is real. The question is why we need to believe it is. Why that image of a loyal animal mourning at Diana's grave feels so right, so true to who she was. And maybe the answer is simpler than we think, because even in death, Diana draws love to her. And what is a dog but love in its purest form?